and she made it happen. And Sarah Silverman goes around going, la-di-da. I said, nah. And it didn't really get any of the history of how the original 9 or how the tour got started. And I think they did an excellent job of showing tennis, because it's usually been done really rather badly, but with computers, they can put a different head on somebody and this and that. And I thought that was really the first time I'd ever seen that done well, and thought Steve Carell was fabulous. And
did he play the character well? Because in the movie, it seemed like even though he was saying these things, it was really just to grab the attention.
I don't know. I think that's probably right, because I'd never heard before or after that he could care less.
Right.
And it kind of made sense to me, but the guy who wrote it knew nothing about tennis, so he might have just made up something nice, and it seemed to work.
Yeah. And Steve Carell can probably pull off any role. So
He's pretty good.
Yeah, he is pretty good.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the $1. And you said you guys held it up. Was it more than just $1? Was it a statement? Was it because that's what a contract had to be?
I think it was a very clever photographer.
Okay.
But it was incredibly symbolic of we're breaking away.
Right.
Whether we knew that at the moment of the dollar, it was, and it turns out that picture went nowhere in the beginning. It went in the Houston Post. And that's it.
Right.
And later it went around the world, and the symbolism kind of, people began to get it, that we were truly starting something, and which grew and grew and grew. And very soon the original 9 got older, and Chris Everett and Martina Navratilova came in, and there was it happens in sports. But there was a place to go. And when we were starting, there was no place. In 1970, the year that this all started, there was a total of $5,000 in prize money from January through September, except the $10,000 plus the $10,000 my mother had put into 2 tournaments. There was no money, and it was going away what there was. So people talk about equal prize money. We were trying to get anything at all. Somebody called me up the other day and said, there's this tournament, the year-end tournament for the women, $14 million in prize money, and the winner, Ashley Barty, got $4 million. I said, $14 million, that's great. I can think of 1,400.
Yeah. There's tennis has changed so much. I mean, and
so many ways.
So many ways. So it's 50 years. It will be 50 years, right? Since, is there anything planned or special? Are you going to be a part of anything?
There are some planned stuff. We had hoped for the International Tennis Hall of Fame. It looks like it may happen, but for their crazy, screwy rules that they won't change, we will. If we get inducted, it'll be for 2021.
Got it.
Makes no sense to me.
Okay.
But the honor is good. The honor is important symbolically.
Absolutely.
But the 9 of us who stood up at that one tournament were immediately joined by many others. So we were not. I mean, it's the symbolic importance, but all those other people put in all the hard yards too.
Yeah.
To build it.
So let's talk about the book, Driven, and why'd you write it, and what's the so writing a book is, you said it took 4 years, I think you said, to write
4
it.
solid years.
Solid years, right? So that's a labor of love.
Yes.
Why the importance of telling your story, and what do you want people to know about it?
It was it had to come out. A lot of it had to do with that I had to live, you could say, a lie or a hidden life. Nobody could know how badly damaged I was by my childhood. It was, I say, abuse. There was verbal abuse, the kind that makes you think a little wave is slammed into you. There was humiliation. I was laughed at for having thick legs, for having a stuffed up nose, for having the smallest vocabulary, for almost anything.
And you went to Stanford at 16, so
yes.
Your vocabulary is probably better then than mine is now.
But it was, I went to, by the way, in terms of growing up, the high school that I went to was absolutely fabulous. I went to school in New York City called Dalton. and famous for one of, I think it's Manhattan, Woody Allen's movie. Shows that. But there was isolation where I was not around other children at all for many years. And even when I was, there was no way to get out. And before I wrote the book, I thought, well, I never had friends. I wasn't around people. I wasn't around kids. I wasn't around other families. And neglect. I was sickly and not taken care of. I was laughed at. So when I say there was abuse, yeah. But I couldn't believe it. The stories that I would tell my poor husband, Bernie, I would tell him stories and I'd tell him the same one again and I'd tell him the same one again. But because I couldn't believe it. And finally, I came to a place where if I wrote it, and in therapy too, I had a better chance of believing it. And believing it made me more whole. And so there's a lot of years in between, but starting in the year 2000, actually go back a step, I got diagnosed with bipolar in 1996, which took away my coping mechanism as working harder than anybody else. Once the coping mechanism went away, many other things happened, and I had a breakdown that lasted 15 years. So as I was beginning to come back to life, or even earlier, I thought maybe I can learn to write. I've done a lot of writing. I'm a lawyer, I did legal writing, I did business writing, I'm a journalist, but I'd never really written like fiction. So I took a short story class at the local college. And instead of writing fiction, I wrote parts of my life. And I began to realize that this was something I really liked doing, but I wasn't strong enough or healthy enough for many, many years to write for 3 or 4 hours a day. But a lot of things came together. And as I wrote, I found, and I did research, I found out what my sister had done an oral history of my father. He was in his late 70s, and she got on the phone with him, and she typed it. And so I had this wonderful resource, what had happened in his early life, in his marriage, and I had access. I didn't own the World Tennis Magazine anymore, but UCLA is just down the road, and I'd go in there and take volumes out, and I did research, and then I would call people and do interviews. And I began to put a lot of pieces together and to understand what had really happened. I had not realized until I started writing the story that my first bipolar depression was in Stanford in France. I just thought I was an unhappy person. For 4 months I was unhappy.
Right.
And nobody had language for that then. It just wasn't, there were no medicines, there was no language. So as things went along, and when we played in the Fed Cup and all that stuff that I went through, I just thought, well, too much pressure in tennis. But by writing it and then polishing it, and I didn't stop till every chapter might have 10 drafts, and it became a joy. And it became healing to be more whole.
So the book talks about many different things. So would you say it's a book that tells the truth about your mother? It's a book about tennis, a book about mental health. Is there anywhere else, anything that I'm missing that you sort of want to?
Well, after
I still want people to buy the book, but
I played tennis until I was closing in on 30. And then I did broadcasting for a couple of years on NBC and CBS and HBO. And those doors began to close. So I went to law school. And I did exceptionally well in law school. And then I practiced law for 3 years. And then I discovered that law firms love people who were lunatics like me, who work too hard. So I called Bernie and I said, he said, come to work with me when I have enough money. We had started a company, and it was just a baby company. So as he grew it, and it could take me in, and then I thought, wow, if I'm not killing myself, maybe I could have a baby. So when I was 41, our daughter was born. The clock had ticked. And then it was our company and Bernie's marketing and sales and my organization, and we took it public. And a couple of years after that, my life fell apart. I did not function so well. So I did a whole lot of things at warp speed, and thus the title, Driven. I had to do it. I had to be somebody. And then I think that a whole lot of things came together, and it doesn't feel like I need to do that anymore. Maybe at a lesser degree.
Okay, that's fair. So you spoke about traveling, and when we spoke a few months ago, you told that two of the highlights were playing the Olympics and playing in the Maccabi Games in Israel. So tell us a little bit about those experiences and why they were so wonderful.
1968 was the Olympics, and that was the year when everything was just blowing up. And tennis had just become, the money had just come into tennis. But the rules were so wacko for the first couple of years that it didn't make sense to become a pro. So I decided not to be a pro. And I was traveling around in Europe, came back to New York, phone rings. You want to play in the Olympics? Are you kidding? Of course. And it was, tennis was an exhibition sport, and played in Mexico. Well, the tournament was in Mexico. The tennis part was in Guadalajara for the first week, and then Mexico City the second week. And I loved Mexico. And it was amazing being in a world with other athletes, because we were pretty much segregated from that. Tennis is like a circus. The whole circus gets up every week and goes to the next place. Same people, new location. Then another week, then again. So we got to see things that we'd never seen before. And one of the things, I grew up playing in Converse tennis shoes, which were heavy, flat, and not helpful. And we go to, they say, oh, go over to that booth over there. You go to that booth. It was Adidas had, for the first time, started giving stuff away to athletes. We got shoes that fit. And, they would be tracksuits with stripes. And that was pretty exciting. And while I was there, I was playing with a tennis racket. I'd started as I was coming back to tennis, the very first steel racket. It was a Wilson T2000. It had a little steel around the outside of it instead of having the typical holes through. And it was new. It was incredible. You got a lot of power, but you had to have enormous control to be able to use it. Otherwise, the ball went shooting off. Now they talk about sweet spots, right? That wasn't sweet spots like that. And at the end of the Olympics, I had an invitation to go to Buenos Aires. I thought, that's great, but my rackets are falling apart. I had brought 5 rackets, and 2 were left. And one string was looking like it was going to go. But I wanted to go to Buenos Aires so bad that I did. And I won in the Olympics. I won the mixed doubles with a guy named Herbie Fitzgibbon. I had no idea who he was. He's ranked like 10 or 12, and I'd never seen him before, and that's fine. And he turned out to be the best mixed doubles partner you could possibly have. So when we went off to Buenos Aires, he and I went. He was he had already entered it. And we won the South American Championships, which was amazing because we beat the team that had either won Wimbledon or got in the finals. So that was like, wait a minute, I can do this? And I think the Olympics was part and parcel of how wonderful it was to go places, to see new things, to break out from whatever 50s part of us was left over. The following year, that was the year where I said I was shot out of a cannon. And I won the Italian Open, which that year was the 5th largest tournament in the world, or the 5th most important. And then when I went to Wimbledon a month or two later, all of a sudden people had invitations for me to go here, there, and the other. One of them was the Maccabi Games. Another one was to go to the Soviet Union. And I said, yes, 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 and yes. And so I went from London to New York, and we went to raise money in order to be able to go to Israel. And the people who were asking me to go to Maccabi Games said, well, can you prove, what institutions do you belong to? Do you have a synagogue? Do you have a Shabbat? Any of that? And I go, no. Well, but they figured, she's too good. We have to let her go.
Yeah.
And then the other one said, can you pay your own expenses? I said, no. So I went to Israel. And I won the singles, doubles, and mixed. I won the women's singles with a loss of like 4 games in the entire tournament. And so I just was a different level.
Right.
And so I went from New York to Tel Aviv to Cleveland.
Which is basically, that's what my favorite cities in that order.
Yeah, right.
New York, Tel Aviv, Cleveland.
Yeah. Where I played the Whiteman Cup, which was U.S. versus Great Britain. And I won all my matches, and I got some big old trophy for being the MVP. And at the end of that, one of my friends who had grown up in Hamtramck, Michigan, too. Her name is Peaches Bartkovich. She and I had been invited to go.
What was her name again?
Peaches Bartkovich.
Yeah. It
was actually Jane Marie, but
she wanted a bigger name on the back of her jersey.
Right. So we get the Whiteman Cup gets finished on a Sunday. Come back to New York on a Monday. They say, okay, you can fly out tonight. And they say, whoops, no, you can't. You have to go out tomorrow. Well, the tournament started on Monday.
Oh.
So we get there on Wednesday. And we arrive, and they send us up to a suite in this hotel thingy in Russia. And there's a TV that doesn't work, and there's a radio that doesn't work. So I went to each one of them, and I'll be polite about it. I say, F the Russians, scream them. And they did everything they could, despite having invited us, to see if they could make us lose.
Right.
When I went to play the semis against somebody I'd never seen before, somehow breakfast took an hour longer than usual, and everybody had to eat together. And then somehow the bus didn't go on time. And then I get to the courts, and they said, you're late, you can't practice. So I go out, and these strokes are coming at me, and I ended up winning. But the whole thing was just, I took it as a hoot. But that's good, because otherwise you'd want to kill them.
Did you get to see the country at all?
Almost. Well, we went to Leningrad. We went to see the heritage.
Yeah.
But we didn't get to see anything in Moscow, but it didn't seem like a whole lot was worth it at that time. It was pretty grim. We didn't get to see any of the good stuff. We got there on a Wednesday.
Right.
So I won the tournament in Russia, and we back to New York to play the U.S. Open. So I'd gone boom, 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 boom. Walking out in the quarterfinals to play Virginia Wade. My mother's walking out with me, and she says, if you win this, you'll be ranked #1 in the country. That's not a good thing to do. You should concentrate on playing.
Right.
And not on something else. And it turns out she was better than I was on that surface anyway. But I was a little overtired from all that traveling, but I loved it.
Yeah.
And that went away the following year.
In many ways, your story is about, it's sort of a love story with tennis, but in a way that other players probably didn't have, because they didn't necessarily have the struggle. Although, and we spoke about this young man, Noah Rubin, is bringing light to a lot of the mental health issues, especially with tennis players who are, as you said, sort of like a circus. they're isolated
Yep.
and living very lonely lives at times.
And even the ones who are doing great, they're isolated with their little group.
Right.
Their coach and their trainer and I don't know what else.
And
Yeah.
nutritionists.
And even if they weren't in tight, the way that tennis is set up, it's a fabulous sport, but it's one-on-one, and you don't have anybody helping you.
Right.
There, off the court, maybe.
Is there ways that tennis could change in a way? I mean, I don't know how closely you follow today, and is there could off seasons? You know, that's what we talk.
Yeah,
talk
that,
about
actually, the
sometimes?
women are doing a good bit of that, where they're used to be they're like 12 minutes off and
Right.
the next season. They stop by the end of October, early November,
Okay.
and then it starts up again in early January. That's a good thing. The guys don't, but the older guys who are winning everything anyway. I mean,
Right.
Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, they're much more careful about their schedule now.
Right.
In terms of talking about schedule, I used to be pretty careful about my schedule because I ended up getting hurt a lot. I busted up my knee, or no, I busted up my elbow in 70, my knee in 71, and my shoulder in 75. And the 75, the shoulder, that was career ending. So, but I was, I also, the drudgery of it. It wasn't so glamorous. A lot of the time we were trying to do it. But I mean, you get up in the morning, you eat, you get transport, you go to the tennis, you practice, you shower, you eat, you play a match, you eat, you shower, you go to bed. I mean, that's it.
Right.
And if there's no extra energy. Wasn't ever able to read anything more than like a page turner on the tour. It's just, there wasn't enough emotional energy to do it. I tried to write a book way back then about an instruction book, and I just couldn't do it on the tour. It just takes it out of you.
Yeah. It sounds tough to be constantly on. As one say.
On, and tennis is also a highly aerobic sport,
Right.
which requires a lot of technique and repetition. So when you talk about practice, you got to do the practice.
Right.
Yeah.
So earlier they asked us if we want to do Q&A. I thought maybe we'd allow anyone. Does anyone in the audience have a question they'd like to
I see
write
one.
your
Yeah.
firsthand? And you're in the brightest shirt, so that worked out well.
Bright.
Brightest shirt.
First of all, I was born in the mid-'60s, and so I consider myself a Title IX baby.
Yay.
Commented earlier, you're not sure, if you had something to do with that. I'm well aware that I'm standing on your shoulders and others like you,
Wow.
and so I want to thank you because tennis and sport has been such a huge part of my life. So thank you very much.
Oh, very kind. Thanks.
And my question is, given recent provisions by sports leagues to address mental health issues, what is the WTA and the ATP, if you know, doing to address these issues? And was there any support, or would there have been any, during your day, that the association would have provided, for players who were having some challenges with mental health?
I can't speak knowledgeably about now. It's something I ought to learn about. That's a really interesting idea, and maybe I could become involved some, having been through what I've been through. In the era that I was playing tennis, there was not much knowledge in the psychiatric community about, certainly about bipolar. The lithium became known as a bipolar medicine. I mean, they call it manic depression back then, in about 1973, 74. So before then, nothing other than electric shock treatment. And you can imagine how much people wanted that, right?
Right.
I mean, if you needed it, but it was not something, and but in terms of support, back then there was nothing. In fact, there was stigma about seeing a therapist. A therapist meant somehow that, were you really nuts? Or why were you doing this? When I started seeing a therapist for the first time in my late 20s, mid to late 20s, and about having gone there 2 or 3 times, all of a sudden, I cried for 2 or 3 days. I just couldn't stop. So I called my friend, Ingrid, who's a Swedish tennis player. And I said, and she said, you're fine, stop. And that was about what I would get. And so it's hard. I mean, I see around me when I talk to people how much more people begin to understand, because we all have something at some level. And so if we can talk about the details of what happens with ourselves, then others can say, oh yeah, me too. Or not quite, but back then there was no talking about that. It really was taboo. And the only thing I get from the WTA, I get their stuff they send around, is very highly detailed how to do training, which I cannot even pierce. I mean, it's like, oh, go away. But so, I mean, it would need to be the kind of way of talking, of telling stories, not kind of telling you what to do. Then that's what I'm seeing in terms of that training. I haven't seen anything about that mental health. But that would be something I should get involved in.
And you just were interviewed by, and we mentioned him earlier, Noah Rubin, who started an organization. He's an active U.S. Men's tennis player, but he started an organization called Behind the Racket, which is addressing some of these issues. It's starting off as a blog and a podcast, but his hope is to actually make waves in mental health issues that are going on in professional tennis and other issues.
In so many ways, he is doing what you're saying. The people are telling their stories, and he's printing them, and it couldn't be better. Yeah.
Anyone else like to ask a question?
Something nutty led up to the diagnosis. Yeah, I guess I'm still embarrassed. I used to rip at my skin and leaving a nasty mess for years. And finally, one day, somebody said, why don't you go to a psychiatrist? They have medicines that can help. So I went to somebody who gave me one of the SSRIs, like Prozac and Zoloft and all that. And it worked. This compulsion had stopped. And then he changed the medicine here, changed the medicine there. About 6 months after a start, he changed one of the medicines, and I couldn't stop crying. He said, oh, you're bipolar. That medicine, if you have that reaction, so it's like completely random that I got diagnosed. I'm sure it would have happened anyway, but it was random the way it happened.
I want to thank Julie for a wonderful conversation. So just a quick plug. So we started these crossover events, and I was telling Julie she's the precursor to professional wrestling, which will be happening in December. And then in March, we'll be welcoming Judy Gold. She's a comedian that will be at the House of Comedy. So we're really, thank you for being here and sharing. You got one more thing.
A plug.
A plug for the book, yeah.
I've narrated it, so anybody who likes audiobooks, it's out there.
Oh, wonderful. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, too.
That's great, thank you.